trying to think whether there's anything else we need to do before we go to the... So we've got a couple of apologies. That's the next thing on the agenda, isn't it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah. So we've had apologies from Councillor Hemraj and also from Councillor Nawaz from Finland.
Okay, thank you.
And from Councillor Pettit, with Councillor Huffer subbing, yeah.
But we are quorate, so we will just... Oh, is Sam going to be late?
Yes. Councillor Wakeford sent his apologies. He would be 10 minutes late, but
yes,
he will be joining us. Yeah.
Okay. But quorate for this meeting is 4, and I am pretty sure we have 4 members, so we're fine. Good. And also welcome, Katie. Very nice to see you again this morning, and Charlotte. Good. The next thing is the questions. 2 questions from public speakers. We have 2 questions from the public. They are not present with us today, but we will read out their questions. Oh, sorry. I'll go back to a different bit of my agenda. Let's do declarations of interest first. Are there any declarations of interest people would like to make? Alice.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I have a declaration of interest on agenda item 6, which mentions skills and employment support for homeless people. I work for It Takes a City, which is the organisation coordinating the charter, which involves that work.
Thank you for that. That's very good to know. Any other declarations of interest? I don't see any. Good. Item 3 is the minutes. Are there any comments on the minutes for accuracy initially? I don't see any comments, so we will take the minutes as an accurate record and move on to the action log. Are there any questions or comments on the action log? I don't see any comments or questions, in which case we will take both the minutes and the action log as accurate record, and I will sign them in a moment. So 2 public questions have been received for today's meeting. The first question from Mr. Carpen was originally submitted for the meeting in September, but has been carried over to today. Both questions have been circulated to members and published on the website. Mr. Carpen and Ms. Nichols are not able to join us today, so I will ask the Governance Manager to read out the questions.
Thank you, Chair. So the first question from Mr. Carpen is, please could the committee write to the Department for Education to find out what its policy is on citizenship education for existing UK adult citizens, and in particular whether it will be commissioning work to make the existing GCSE in citizenship studies available to adults at lifelong learning centres, and whether combined authorities will have the freedom to fund free places on such courses for those on basic skills programmes without the old 5C GCSEs. According to Kazar Shah of University College London, in his paper of 2020, no such opportunities exist for citizenship education for adults, equivalent to that which is available in some schools via the GCSE in citizenship studies.
Thank you very much. Is that on? No. That's better. Thank you very much. There's been a very thorough answer prepared. Andrea, I don't know whether you want to read it out or whether you are happy for me to do a very short summary and then we can put the whole of the long answer on the website. I don't know if you have a preference.
I'm happy for you to give a summary.
The long answer, which will appear on the website and will be sent to Mr. Carpen, includes a lot of detail about what is available and is not available. The sort of part of the question that I think it's important to answer now is that there are multiple accredited qualifications available to adults. This provision is usually embedded across the curriculum rather than offered as a standalone qualification. A GCSE in Citizenship Studies Level 2 is 120 guided learning hours, and while it could be funded under the adult skills funding, there is insufficient demand for delivering this qualification to adult learners. And in many cases, it would only be co-funded and therefore costing the learner £360. Therefore, most adult learners prefer to develop their knowledge and skills in citizenship through non-accredited routes, and the preference is for an embedded citizenship throughout the curriculum. So I hope that's a summary of roughly where we are, but there's a lot more detail in the answer that will be sent to Mr. Carpen. Should we move on to the second one? Thank you.
Sorry, Sorry, the second question is from Ms Nicholson. It is very hard to study subjects other than English, maths and languages unless you can afford to attend an independent sixth form college. Neither schools or further education colleges have the funds for adult learners. If you were unfortunate to have done badly at school and are now over 18, your options to increase the qualifications you have are extremely limited. In light of that, I would like to ask, what is the scope of the skills-funded provision? Will it be narrowly focused on English and maths, or is there room to expand it to include other academic subjects?
The committee are happy. There's quite a long summary about all the detail of what is available, but a slightly, which will be made available to Ms Nicholson, a slightly shorter version is that there is scope across the skills funding for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Our funding is aligned to national policy and includes flexibilities to fully fund English for speakers of other languages and also the first level 2 and level 3 qualifications. So there is opportunity for this. There's quite a lot more detail in the answers, which I think we'll put on the website and we'll make available to Ms Nicholson that way. So thank you very much to our public speakers for their, or for our public questioners for their questions. We will go back to the main agenda. I think the next thing is the Combined Authority Forward Plan. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the forward plan? I don't see any questions or comments, so we will note the forward plan. And then we'll move to the Director's Highlight Report, which is a new item on our agenda. We discussed putting this on the agenda at our last meeting. I think just given how fast things have been moving in the skills and just generally across the Combined Authority over the summer, it's particularly helpful to be able to give this opportunity to Andrea to tell us about the work she's been doing and kind of what's going on. So I will hand over to Andrea at this point. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So hopefully the Director's Report provides everybody with a summary of the key activities that we've been focused on in the last few months. I've provided a summary there of all the key changes that the new Labour government are introducing as a part of their manifesto to unlocking opportunities and breaking down barriers for individuals. So a key mission of the Labour government is around economic growth and opportunities, and all of these key changes are really aligned to that. So the report gives you quite a detailed summary of a lot of the changes that we're expecting to come into force. A key thing to just highlight is the work around Skills England, which is a new body that the government is establishing. And I'm pleased to say that the Combined Authority is very well aligned to conversations around the development of Skills England. I was up at the Department for Education on Friday morning, again meeting with Richard Pennycook, who is the chair of Skills England, along with other colleagues across the skills sector. I was representing not only CPCA, but other MCAs across the country in terms of making sure that we are very much part of the conversation, and we've lobbied hard for co-production in a lot of policies that Skills England are going to produce, rather than just being seen as an additional stakeholder. So that's a very positive move forward, and we really welcome Skills England as a body to really help unify the skills ecosystem across the country. Other key things just to draw out in the report is the progress on a number of areas of work that the skills team have been leading around Good Work Charter, universal support. And just a quick update on universal support. We have heard from the government that that's now going to be called the National Supported Employment Programme, and we are expecting more information on our grant agreement to come through after the budget in a week or so's time. Other key information in that report is around skills brokerage, and I know Alexis is there this morning to share with you her paper on the future work of that, as well as information on boot camps. A couple of pieces of work that I've particularly been working on with other external colleagues is around education and employment for prison leavers. So I've been meeting with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, colleagues from the Ministry of Justice and Department for Work and Pensions to really look at how we can develop a succinct strategy for that area of work, given the government's changes in early release schemes and making sure people have got the right support when they leave prison. And I've also been having conversations with colleagues, as is detailed in point 2.7, around supporting homeless and working on the homeless charter that Cambridgeshire County Council is leading, along with other third sector organisations, and really making sure that that work again is quite well aligned to the more holistic work we're doing across the skills team and linked to the work in the work and health agenda. So that's my kind of key kind of headline summary of the paper. I'm really happy to take any questions from members of the committee.
Thanks so much, Andrea. There's a lot in there. Do we have questions? Sam.
Thank you. I was certainly minded, skimming through the report, to invite you, Andrea, to sort of give reassurance to the committee. I know you've given to some of us in conversation around the extent to which we, as a combined authority, are taking all opportunities to make ourselves available to help the new government put into practice its commitment around building mayoral combined authorities into Skills England in a fairly core way. I think what you've just outlined preempts that entirely, not least your recent visits to Whitehall. But I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I think there's enormous potential opportunity coming from some of the elements very neatly sort of summarised in your paper, but there's an awful lot of work for our committee over the months and years ahead that I think this presages. So thank you.
Thank you. Nick.
Andrea, hope you get better soon, and thanks for getting down to London last week. Hope it wasn't there where you caught your viruses. Nasty bugs in London. I just wanted to kind of follow on from what Sam said. Thank you for the reassurances in the paper. It is certainly very much at the forefront of conversations that have been had at many meetings now, where all the mayors have gathered. The skills area, kind of driving the economy through working with our different teams at different combined authorities, is very much aligned to many of the new governments, and having you and the team at the forefront of that, it's reassuring to hear that. I have, however, one question, which is a kind of, maybe it's more, what do you think? In that, I note, obviously, with stuff like, say, the Careers Hub, we're still in that process of transition from where we used to, as a combined authority, outsource the work to the company that was GrowthWorks, and they got paid handsomely for it. And we're now expanding our staff within our own organisation. I'm absolutely something that I was very keen, and it was in agreement with the business board in the past, that although we could see there was a role for outsourcing in the past, it was maybe not the way we wanted to proceed. And as a legacy, I am concerned that the combined authority, and dare I say it, just the mayor, or the concept of whoever the mayor is, are we being recognised for the work that we are doing? And particularly as we're now going to be taking on a lot more responsibility, have we got our message across to local business, big or small, that the opportunities are presenting themselves through new government and some of the ambitions to drive the economy? Are we going to get the recognition as an organisation? Or indeed the criticism if we don't do it? How do you feel about that at the moment? And have we got our branding right?
I think if I was to do a sort of self-assessment against that, I would put that down as an area for improvement. I think whilst we do in some senses have a good and developing relationship with employers, especially in the last few months with regards to the work we've done around internships, with boot camps. Alexis is there, she can probably say much more in her paper. I'm happy that we've got a very good foundation on which to build. And I think all of the opportunities that are outlined in the paper in terms of what's emerging with the adoption of things like the Growth and Skills Levy, the Work and Health Charter, I think there's real opportunity for us to to work with colleagues in the chamber and in the business, in the growth hub, to really make sure there is a succinct message for employers around the skills agenda, and that will really help to drive growth. So I think for us, we are very much, in that role as a systems leader. We've got that opportunity to join those dots and make sure that we are delivering a very coherent and consistent message across the region. So that's a key priority for me and the team, and I'd be really happy to work with you on that, Mayor, to make sure that that's an improvement going forward.
Thank you. Reassured. I'm very happy to work with the whole of the team.
Thank you.
Quick question from me, Andrea, if there aren't any from other people, which I don't think there are at the moment. It was really interesting to see the section in your paper on the work you've been doing with employers around internships, and I think that's really valuable. I just wondered whether you would like to feedback any more about that work and how that's come about, and whether there are going to be more events like that in the future, because it looks very positive.
So I might, if it's okay, defer to Alexis on that, because Alexis has been leading the team and that area of work on internships. So it might be a nice opportunity for Alexis to come in and give us some more information on that.
Oh, okay. Apologies, is it on? I expected a light on my side and not just on yours. Ah, right, okay. Apologies, Lucy. Could you repeat the question, please?
No problem at all. It was just to say that it was really good to see in the highlights report the work that's been done on the paid internships and recruitment work with employers. There was the webinar and the work with Waitrose on future apprentices. All of that is, I think, quite a new thing for us to be doing, and it would be nice to just hear a little bit more about it.
Okay. Am I turned on? Right, okay. So our internship program is actually something that I think speaks to the question that Lucy's asking, and also perhaps fills in a little bit more detail that in relation to the question that you also asked, Nick, earlier. So our internship program is something that we've been able to deliver through our UK SPF, UK Shared Prosperity Funding. It's a program that from its inception has been co-designed with employers. So we spent quite a significant amount of time earlier in the year working with a group of pilot employers, ranging from very, very, very small to very, very, very large, employers that already had existing internship programs and looking at what we could learn from that, and also following on from the learning of our very successful previous Community Renewal Fund internship program as well. So very much a program that was built on learning, built on principles and the kind of model of co-design. So right from the very start of this project, it has been about working with the business community to initiate growth of workforce, to explore ways of bringing people into the workforce that perhaps wouldn't necessarily be part of your traditional talent pool. It has been very, very well received across the board and highly successful so far. We've had some fantastic results. We're working with some fantastic employers. We've got some great case studies on the website for anybody that would like to have a look. But it very much is something that we're very, very proud of, and something that we think that we can continue to evolve into future projects. So for us, it was about testing different and more effective ways of working, learning from some of the limitations of the previous service that was held within GrowthWorks, perhaps where that service didn't always fully effectively engage with SME market, how we could learn from that and how we could change. So it very much has been a flagship for us. It's something we're very proud of, something we're very excited about, and something that we're hoping that we'll be able to bring some really in-depth impact reporting in the new year around what it's actually meant for the economy and some of the residents that have benefited from it as well. And it's a mechanism for us. It's not just about creating those opportunities, it's also about creating better opportunities and starting to explore ways of working that will feed into initiatives like the Good Work Charter and our commitment to work and health. Sorry, that was probably a much more a longer answer than you were expecting. But hopefully that goes some way to kind of share a little bit of the intent about what we've been trying to achieve and how we've been going about it.
Thank you. That was great. It's really, really good to hear about it. I'm not quite sure whether when you say there are case studies on the website...
Apologies, I can share.
Could you send
Absolutely,
a link round to the
I
committee? Because I think a number of us, unless it's there are some links on that bit of the document, but I have a feeling they're different ones. So if you could send those around, I think there are a number of us who might really be happy
I'd be really pleased to share those.
That would be brilliant. Eileen.
I just want to know, are these internships to people who are already work ready, or do they need some preparation beforehand? And do they lead to employment at the end?
Unless it was already on.
Oh, goodness me. Apologies for my technical failings. So in answer to your question, Councillor Wilson, it is a combination of both. So our internship programme, we work with a range of employability services across the area, using internships as a pathway for progression. We also have some mechanisms built into our delivery that enable people that are slightly further from work readiness to make that transitional step. But the intention of the funding that's provided to businesses, it's not about subsidising salaries, it's about creating capacity in those businesses to bring people in and provide that additional support. So it very much is about enabling those transitions for people that perhaps need that little bit of support to make that thing happen. Part of our due diligence process and the way that we assess our willingness to fund and support the businesses that we work with is around the sustainability of the roles that they create. So we ask for proper job descriptions. We're not going to cover costs that perhaps you might traditionally pick up with a temp. We want to create roles. So this is about allowing a business to perhaps it's the way to kind of kick off something that they've been wanting to work on for a while, or perhaps find the talent for something that they've not been able to get off the ground because they've not been able to find that right person. So we do build into all of our assessment processes a commitment from businesses that, obviously we cannot hold them to it. Lots can change in 3 months in a workplace, but we ask for that commitment from a business that there is some mechanism for sustainability around the role. We are also continuing the work back end of our kind of programme for anyone that isn't successful in making that transition, a long-term transition, of how we can quickly help them to get back into another workplace with those skills that they've got. And one of the really innovative things, I'm so excited about internships, you can probably tell, I could talk about it all day long, but on a final note in terms of innovation that's been built into that project is our work with our colleagues in Regions of Learning, which is a Cambridge City-based, also UK Shared Prosperity funded piece of work. We are building in digital badging as a framework into all of the internships that we fund. So there are 5 core skills that you can develop. They are core skills that were identified in the LSIP as those most in demand by local employers, and we've built out a framework that is adaptable across sectors, that an intern can develop and demonstrate skills. So if they aren't able to stay in that workplace, we can help them to articulate everything they've learned and take it on to the next workplace.
The outcome reflects your enthusiasm. It's going to be 100%.
Thank you. Thank you. I will take that as a compliment on a Monday morning. It's a lot of caffeine has gone into it, but an awful lot of energy has gone into this from the team. And it's a really unique opportunity for us to do something quite different with local employers. And we are really passionate and we are really excited about it. I think for us, it's about that resident change, and it's also about that business behaviour change. So it's almost the kind of the perfect project for us as an economic growth team.
Thank you so much. It's really good to hear about it.
Oh, I'm still on.
It's okay. Okay. I don't see any further questions. So thank you very much to Andrea and to Alexis for the information in that report. And it's really good to hear about a lot of the work that's been going on. And I know it has been a very busy summer. Good. We will move on now to item 7 on the agenda, which is the in-year performance review, which I think is also for Andrea to introduce. So over to Andrea again.
Thanks, Lucy. So really pleased to share this report with you. Obviously, this is a report that has followed through from the postponed meeting in September. So In terms of timelines and dates, we're a little bit out. But hopefully the report really does give you a lot of narrative around the breadth of the work that the team are working on with key partners, and also some of the key successes and areas for improvement in terms of where we're focused. I think this report really has followed a very similar vein to previous iterations of a report that has come to committee. And moving forward, what I would like to do is to provide committee with a more detailed kind of data set with trends so that you can see more clearly the data and performance over time, with the detailed kind of narrative linked to that. And I also want to make a point on timings, because a lot of the programmes that we're working on, some of them are across financial years, some of them are across academic years, and there's always a moment in time when you'll have to look at data where it might not give you the outcome because a period of time hasn't concluded yet. And with regards to our adult education funding, even though the academic year would have finished at the end of July, we don't get our final data ratified by the Department for Education until next week. So there's always a lag in terms of giving you that kind of final story in terms of what the data says. So I just wanted to point those things out to you. But I think, as you can see from the report, we've had some real success with a lot of the programmes that we're developing. To really point out some of the work around boot camps, which I know Nick is going to cover in the boot camps report that's coming up. Also the developments around the Careers Hub, which was a service that was brought in-house back in January of this year, and the success that we've seen in that transition, and in working really closely with the Careers and Enterprise Company to really build a lot of work inspiration activity across the region, and that's set to continue, as well as to have a focus on some of our key priority schools, including those with larger proportions of young people on free school meals, and also working with alternative providers where there are young people there that may have been permanently excluded from education, and making sure that they have good access to careers and work inspiration activities. So that's really my kind of high level summary. There's obviously a lot of information in the report. As I said, I would be keen to bring another report back to committee in the spring, which gives another update. But I'm happy to take any feedback or questions or comments from committee.
Thank you very much. There is indeed a lot of information in the report, so thank you very much for that. Questions on this one for Andrea? Sam?
Thank you. I didn't want to jump ahead of anyone who wanted to pick up specifics of substance in here, but as you said, Lucy, I think it's an enormously helpful and expansive report. But I do think the points Andrea made around timing are really valid, not least given that the time of our officer teams here are not unlimited. We've already heard this morning. I commend the excitement as well, which I certainly share around apprenticeships in terms of the other work we would like to happen. So I think the value of an in-year report that's pretty late in the year, but that isn't quite soon enough for us to actually get the overall year's data, so is only a partial picture anyway. I'd be interested in other views around the table, but as useful as this is now, I'd be minded to be entirely supportive of a slightly more sort of fundamental rethink about the point in the year we bring this, and if that's sort of once rather than twice, but we've got, you know, a more useful data set, as you suggested, I think would be beneficial to our considerations in future. If there was more nuance to your suggestion, by all means flag it in terms of, you know, different bits at different points. But as I say, Chair, I think this is both helpful, but I don't think that we need it at this point in the year compared with how much more helpful it could be at less work at a different time.
Mine wasn't on. Andrea, I don't know whether you want to respond to what Sam said at all, or whether you're happy to just take that away as feedback. I mean, I think...
Yeah, I'm really happy to take that away. You
Fine.
know, I think for me, this is something I'd like to work on with the team and bring back to committee in a more timely fashion, you know, perhaps set out a little bit differently so that it's much easier to kind of really draw out the key highlights of success and where we may have some concerns. So I'm happy to take that feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nick, did you want to come in next?
Yeah, thank you. It's obviously in the report, the challenges, and you know, there's a declaration, the biggest challenge, capacity issues within schools. I can think of this all the time. You know, I hear, you know, teachers understandably overwhelmed by more and more expectations, sometimes from central government, let alone local government, kind of, can you do this? But at the same time, when I'm out and about with the business leaders, and you know, they're often saying, oh, we want to get into schools and trying to inspire people, and then local business saying, you know, I'd love to get and talking and getting kids understanding what you don't necessarily have to follow it more, you know, traditional academic, you know, the idea of the rise and rise of apprenticeship. So it's full 5 lines in the report, but to me it seems to be the one that keeps coming up time and time again. And it's kind of the challenge back as well, what would we be doing around the table? We're taking the report, we hear it, but what on an individual level, again, I would ask myself, you know, as the mayor, or indeed as elected leaders, as around the table from all the different areas, could we also be doing, in working with you in the combined authority, and indeed officers at a local level, to do this, or indeed getting into schools, if indeed they allow us to. And I appreciate you can't just walk into schools and saying we're here to help. You know, that doesn't tend to come across as well, because it could almost be seen as criticism that they're not doing it, and that's not at all what we want to do. We want to work collaboratively on it. So, what do we have to do to help? That's my question.
All question for you there, Andrea.
So I think I'm not sure if Alexis has got some points to kind of bring in here as well, but I think we already have good relationships with schools. So we work with about 77 schools across the region and colleges as well. Some relationships are stronger than others. I think supporting them to build the capacity to be able to deliver this agenda. You know, that's such a bigger question in terms of, you know, how the school system is set up. But I think one of the roles that we definitely have to play is really highlighting the benefits to young people of having that employer engagement and access to work inspiration, because I think too often the curriculum can narrow the focus sometimes for young people in terms of really understanding what opportunities are available to them. So if we can build capacity within the system, put on events that really help schools interact with the broader kind of careers work, and to deliver the key objectives that are set out in the Gatsby framework. So there are a set of benchmarks that we work with schools on to see how closely aligned they are to these benchmarks in terms of giving high quality careers guidance. So I think all of us have a role to play in building capacity, signposting schools, making sure that we can make it as easy as possible for them to interact with events and with employers, and making sure that they really recognise the benefits of work inspiration to young people, not only for, you know, them moving on into positive destinations, but in terms of getting young people to really think about the broadest of opportunities available to them as young people. And it's not just a route to sixth form. You know, there are multiple routes post 16 that young people can access, including beyond that university, higher degree level apprenticeships and beyond. And it's really making sure that we sell that holistic message.
Thank you. Alexis, you want to? I think it's fine, don't worry. Does anyone else have any questions on this paper? I don't think so. So thank you very much again, Andrea, to that, and for the team who've done lots of work putting all that information into the paper, and we will look forward to having a future paper with even more data in it in the spring. So that was to note and comment, which we have done. We will now move on to the further education cold spots, which is from Rob Turner from Grant Thornton. So Rob, over to you.
Great, and thank you very much for having us back to this committee. It's a really kind of valuable time to be able to just kind of present where we're going with the cold spots work in terms of the sort of shorthand for this project, but also actually just time to sort of pause and get any reflections back in from this group. I have a handful of slides which will just sort of talk you through in terms of the plan for today. If we could just flick to the next slide, please. No probs. Oh. Brilliant. So just really want to cover three things today. The first is just to give you an overarching view in terms of where we are on the investment and implementation plan. A number of you were here in the summer when we presented the findings from the feasibility report, which identified kind of clear needs in St Neots and East Cambs, not for kind of big, brand new sort of buildings, but actually for sort of targeted provision. We've been, since that meeting, working very closely with Andrea and the team to sort of say, well, actually, what's the best next step forward that really gets kind of momentum behind things? And so rather than sort of kind of more work around the sort of the business case, actually, Andrea and team very helpfully sort of steered the agenda through to actually moving towards a procurement process to try and invest some capital monies into provision. So I'll just talk you through that timeline. Before we kind of started the starting gun for the procurement exercise, we've been re-engaging with a number of the providers across both East Cambs and Hunts, but also actually the combined authority regions. So let me give you a few headlines from that because I think it is interesting and encouraging, and then I'll just sort of end talking through next steps before opening it up to questions. If we just flick to the next slide, this will give you a sense of the timeline we're working towards. So the kind of sort of top row is sort of what we're doing now. It's the kind of preparatory work where we're starting to really think quite hard around what are the critical success factors and spending objectives for this work. What's in and out of scope? I think it's very easy when you start a procurement exercise to kind of want to just put everything into it, but actually that makes it quite a difficult procurement exercise to respond to. So in order to generate the best responses and to ultimately get the best value for this investment, we're working hard with the team to say what's in and what's out. Obviously, since we started the work, there's a new government. Andrea's already touched on some of the plans there, so we want to make sure that we're creating that alignment particularly with national priorities. We're making sure we're engaging with stakeholders across the combined authority, but actually really importantly, and one of the big calls when we did the initial engagement around the feasibility work from providers was keep us involved. So we've been back outside of the procurement exercise, but having further conversations with providers. And we're now, if you kind of come to that sort of second row, we're now moving into starting to draft the materials, with the plan being that in December, we have a kind of early market engagement briefing. So that will be more formal, still a chance to take feedback and reflections from the market before launching, effectively finalising those materials and launching the procurement in January. We will be kind of on hand with the officer team here to respond to questions as you go through the procurement. That's likely to be a 6-week window for applications. I'll touch on that again in a moment. With bids then assessed and the plan that awards will be made in March. So quite a sort of tight timeline, but actually it gives us time to really make sure that this procurement exercise aligns to what we saw in the feasibility study, but really kind of sets things up and works with the existing providers. If we just flick to the next slide, just want to unpack a little bit around those provider consultations. And genuinely, they've been really positive and encouraging, and I don't think that should be understated, both in terms of how the providers have massively valued the fact that there is this engagement. So I think credit to Andrea and team to say, well, actually, look, let's go back out and speak to them. From as a sort of stakeholder perspective, I think we've had people who were slightly sort of, well, where's this all going? What does this all mean when we were doing the feasibility work? To now actually, no, we want to get behind this. You're doing exactly the right thing as a combined authority. This is really exciting. So that's been really positive. And of course, in tight funding environments, kind of people really do value the fact that money is being invested into this. So that I just want to sort of make that point, and I think credit to the committee and the team for sort of taking that route. Those conversations have really been twofold. One's been kind of, well, have you got any ideas? What's your sort of thinking without the sort of detail? But also then just enabling us to test some of those timelines, test some of the things around how they work. And there are a number of ideas. This is just a smattering of projects. Some are very, very specific points, which I thought actually probably in a public meeting, probably not worth kind of going into at this stage, but just in a very kind of broad sense, you can just sort of see the sorts of different projects where people are understanding, well, they've seen the headlines from the feasibility study, they've seen the need for provision in particularly East Cambs and St Neots, but also actually what are they currently doing, where are their current strengths, and actually every single consultation there's been 4 or 5 different seeds of ideas that have come through. Everything from actually, well, we could really do something with this money around creating immersive learning rooms with these interactive dummies to support healthcare, through to you'll see a number of different ideas around green skills, from how they could kind of renovate existing buildings to enable that, how they could purchase specialist equipment that would really support that, through to bigger plans around things like green tech centre developments and this money enabling to do that. But then spattered around that, there are a whole other set of ideas. So creation of a digital skills hub, through to actually one of the things we need to do in across the command authority is actually better mobile teaching experiences. So could we use this funding to get more kit and equipment to that? Through to T-level provision, so again, redevelopment of existing buildings to really facilitate that. Also, various people looking at kind of major infrastructure that's happening, and is there a role for sort of construction there? So lots of ideas. None of these, we've been very careful not to sort of say, well, actually that's perfect or not, but actually what it's done is it's given us a huge amount of information that we can take back and start to think about, well, actually, what does this mean for the procurement? And if we just flick on to the next slide, there are just 5 kind of bigger headlines which might be good to get sort of some initial reflections from this group as we start to define the programme. So the first one, if I sort of start at the sort of 12 o'clock, when you speak to people around kind of how quickly could they actually have something built or done and sort of on the ground delivering, there are varied timescales for delivery. Everything from the kind of sort of 6 to 18 month sort of window. And I suppose a question that would be great to get some reflections in this group is kind of, I suppose, is how quickly do we want things on the ground? The obvious answer is as soon as possible. But again, that might be quite an important sifting question when we say in the procurement activity would need to be delivered in X time window. That will be helpful because it will mean that we're bringing forward bids that are deliverable in that timeline, but it may rule some things out. So again, it'd be good to get reflections there. If I just go around clockwise, they're very supportive of the timeline for procurement. So generally, I mean, of course, people would always like as much notice and as much information, but people were happy with this idea that we would kind of brief the market pre-Christmas with a sort of window, 6-week window. That felt for people were positive about that. Worth saying, and I know this is an item that's kind of close to this committee as well as the combined authority as a whole. There were a number of mentions around the importance of transport. So obviously this is separate, but I think the one common factor across every single consultation was whatever we do with this money also needs to kind of make sure it aligns with plans around transport. So Andrea and I will be picking that up. Just obviously it's separate, but we've got to make sure that there's those link-ups there. There were then two other questions, if we just continue sort of around the clock as such, where again, it would be really good when we pause in a moment for just to get some thoughts and reflections. So the first one is, in amongst kind of all those other ideas that we talked about on the previous slide, and we've had really good engagement around, there are clear opportunities around particularly the sort of NEET, the entry level, the work-ready skills that we've kind of talked about already. I suppose there's a question for this group around, do we want to just sort of open the procurement? It could be anything. Or do we want to try and narrow it down? So acknowledging that this could fund capital provision around NEET and entry-level skills, as well as it could kind of sort of higher-level skills, or and just see what comes through, or do we want to kind of draw a bit more of a tighter boundary and say, well, actually, no, this is much more around particular kind of sort of sectors and industry of focus and some of the growth areas. There's not a right or wrong. I think you would get bids in on both. It's just there's just a bit of a decision around there. And then the second one is interesting. There are a number of, again, really positive partnerships that exist both between providers and business and between providers themselves. And I suppose the question that came back to us is, what's the view on collaboration being a prerequisite? So again, would it be a sifting criteria that we would be expecting people to join up? When we do the pre-market briefing in December, would we be giving people effectively a task then to go away and start to engage and work with different providers, different businesses, so that they are presenting joint bids? There's not a right or a wrong. There are pros and cons with both sides of that. But I think particularly those two issues would be really helpful to get any reflections from this group, both today, but also sort of when you kind of go away and mull these things over afterwards. So if we just flick to the final slide before I kind of open it for questions, kind of what are the immediate next steps? Well, we're continuing to draft the procurement documents with the plan, as I say, that then the sort of key public milestone will be early market engagement in December. Probably sort of the beginning half, otherwise you're too much into the Christmas period. But we want to give people as much notice so we can generate as quality bids as possible. So that's the next steps. I will pause there, Chair. Happy to take any questions, comments, particularly welcome any reflections on those different points.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob. Really helpful and good to hear that it's been a very productive and positive conversation so far. And I think that conversation is in itself a valuable part of the process, and I might come back to that in a little while. Nick.
Okay, first in. So two questions really. The first one is about the consultation. It seems very thorough, and I know where you've been. I know you've consulted yourself, but where do you feel there are still holes in the forms of your consultation? Not because of maybe because of your own actions, maybe, or because you haven't been able to get to people. You know, we could all come up with some great ideas, but if there's a very important cohort, such as the NEET population, you said, well, that's not what we want, then we need to. So that's the first question. And the second one, which you kind of refer to around procurement, I'm very pleased that we've shown a certain degree of maturity, sometimes frustratingly, in that this budget has been sitting to get spent, and we have listened, and it seemed like a good idea. We acknowledge there's a problem in East Cambridgeshire and in the St Neots, the largest market town, that there is a cold spot for further education. But instead of let's just build another building, which then gets underfilled or underutilised, we're now encouraging innovation. I love the slide where you said some of the new ideas, you know, renovation of buildings, new ideas. That's great. Want to hear more about that. But when we go into procurement, and I'm not quite sure, you're designing the procurement document, or because we've got a team within the Combined Authority, which I hope, when it comes to procurement, would work in a different way to the way it maybe did before. Because I don't want to know just which gives the best value for money. I want to know which is going to make the biggest difference for the kids of East Cambridgeshire and the people who are currently out of employment in St Neots, and it's the value added. What's going to give? How are we going to measure the intervention and all these innovations, rather than just saying this is good value for money? And that's what I want to know. When do we question that? Do we question you now, or should I be talking to my own procurement department about it? Because that, to me, is the difference as a combined authority that works with civil values, dare I say it, mayoral priorities, mayoral values, to make something different when we finally get it out. And in some ways, I don't care if it takes 6 months or 18 months. I want the best that makes the biggest difference. And it's not always about the value for money. It's about making life-changing interventions that last for the whole of the community.
No, really, really helpful. If I take those two, I'll take them in reverse order if that's okay. So we are absolutely working very, very closely with the procurement team in the combined authority. So we will be providing bits to kind of feed into there. One of the things we had on the timeline is a kind of more detailed workshop. I think it probably the plan for that will be kind of in November. I think it's at that point we need to make sure that the exercise as a whole is absolutely aligned to the things you just talked about, so that it's at that point that we'll really be kind of sort of checking and challenging what we've put in. Is it clear? Is it driving towards the right priorities? And then importantly, alongside that, how is all of this going to be assessed so that it doesn't just become a sort of tick box exercise, but actually there's the ability to really look at the responses we get and understand them. So I think probably a conversation with your procurement team, but absolutely we can take that back from this to kind of feed that back in. We've got a conversation tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's also, it's not just for me to ask the question. I wonder if people around the table, be it representations from the business board, be it from a representative, particularly from East Cambridgeshire, or as well as Huntingdonshire, you know, they've got a bit of skin in the game on this. And I'm just wondering, when are we going to be involved, or is there a space for us to be involved? I'd want to be involved, but at the same time, I don't want to cause delay and I don't want to make it more difficult, but I just feel there's something there about us really being involved.
Yeah, and I think we would welcome that. This has got to work. I mean, this is not a kind of us doing something separate. This has to be a kind of shared endeavour. I think the challenge with any procurement exercise, as I kind of sort of said at the start, is that the more you layer into it, the harder it becomes to actually deliver it. So I think that's the bit that we'll just have to be really focused on. But I think as a collective, we can really work through that. And part of the programme of work that we've designed has that kind of workshop, that sort of check challenge. So absolutely, I will pick up with Andrea so that we can get that scheduled and booked in. So that's absolutely fine. In terms of the consultation, again, I'm happy to be challenged on this and collectively challenged on it, because what we've done with this sort of second round is really focused in on speaking to providers. So we've not gone back out to kind of all of the different local authority stakeholders at this stage. We've really focused in on providers, of whom the kind of neat entry-level skills questions was quite regularly raised. I suppose if we think there are particular providers, and again, Andrea, we can pick this up when we catch up, if there are particular ones that we would want to make sure we've spoken to as part of this, then that's absolutely fine. The way we've kind of drawn the boundary at this stage was those that were engaged in the first kind of phase of consultations. We've effectively gone back to them to say, look, let us give you an update on the project. Here's the next set of questions, and that's worked really well. But there's dangerous self-reinforcement. They kind of voted with their feet and got engaged in the first stage. We've gone back to them. There could still be people missed there. So I think that's probably just a sense check, and we can share the names of the organisations to make sure that we're covering those bases.
Thank you. I think, obviously, speaking from perspective in Huntingdonshire and with St Neots in our patch, I think, as the committee talked about the previous meeting where this was discussed, I think one of the obvious sort of superficial concerns in light of what the feasibility study found and the steps proposed since then was whether we were taking a step back from sort of targeted interventions in St Neots and East Cambs and looking more broadly with a view to helping improve and solve structural challenges within the provider landscape in our area in general, as opposed to really targeting interventions in the cold spots. And I know all involved have been at pains to ensure it doesn't look like that, because I don't think it is that. I think, as you've alluded to, it is absolutely critical that we find something that is going to be deliverable through the provider landscape that we've got. But I wonder if you'd like to make any comment or reassurance around the extent to which engagement with the providers has reassured you on our behalf that they really are focused around the opportunities for clearly not looking in isolation, which I think was the one of the limitations of how the work started initially, but how they really are focused around what they can do in line with the original purpose of this project, around really tackling those cold spots within that sort of integrated system. And I think, you know, on a number of the specifics that you threw out in the helpful update presentation, I think, you know, ultimately our residents are going to be more interested in the kind of question on the ground of is this going to impact our current situation, as Nick described extremely eloquently, rather than there being, you know, terribly strong views around the precise mechanics of that. So I'm open to us being flexible to find the art of the possible. And from the a couple of the slides you did just show us around some of the sort of green skills infrastructure aspects being looked at, I think that does sound to me reassuring that I'm inferring, and you might like to clarify or reassure that there has been a degree of sort of iterative consideration of the feasibility study outcomes with the providers around, you know, sense checking in view of their own understandings as well, because as we've talked about previously, and I'm sure East Cambs would say similarly, there was aspects in the feasibility study that I think we'd recognise more and less about our districts in terms of what the needs are, the opportunities are. There's that massive chicken and egg problem, which is how can we evidence what the need is before we've trained, provided the skills base to be able to, you know, capitalise on something latent in the economy. But I hope that's sort of faintly helpful, and certainly we'll be grateful to reflect on more specific input further to your invitation soon. I know it's obviously not ideal having a verbal presentation with slides here rather than sort of full papers in advance, but I've been reassured before the meeting that is a function of the extent to which you're presenting hot off the press, and I'm really grateful that we've got as much as possible from you, as opposed to merely what you would have had to pin down to meet paper deadlines a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, as long as we can carry on that conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, no, and thank you for your patience. Yeah, just the sort of most of the consultations happened last week, which we'd already missed the deadline. Just on, I suppose, those 2 points, if I kind of caricature them as sort of geography and sector, just very in shorthand. So in terms of geography, absolutely, providers have got the geographical focus. And what's been really interesting is some have said, no, we're interested in kind of thinking about both. Others have said, no, we would very much think about East Cambs or very much think about St Neots. And so there's been a kind of maturity there. And this hasn't just been well, we'll just go for everything because it's on the table. I think people have thought carefully about how they could align to existing provision. The need, this is obviously capital funding, so you would need to be able to deliver something in whatever you create. So they're really engaging with that kind of challenge and issue. So that has, I think, yeah, as much as you can without seeing kind of bids. I think people have got that. This isn't been a sort of, oh, well, we'll say we'll do something, but actually this is going to be kind of sort of combined authority-wide. In terms of sector focus, I think some of them have very much jumped on particular things within the feasibility report. So particularly the sort of health and social care, a number have kind of honed in on there. Others are using a mix of kind of their own experience and expertise and some of the live conversations they're having in other parts of the combined authority to think, well, actually, we could extend X or Y into one of the geographies. So I think we are. It's felt a very positive process. People aren't kind of shoehorning things in. The challenge will come when we start to then try and write this down so that we are really clear, and we're kind of driving the best quality bids back. And I think we're back to that point around the sort of the more kind of heads we can get to sort of check and challenge that, the better. I think people do get what the combined authority is trying to do around this, which I think is a positive.
I've got Katie, then Eileen.
Yeah, just two questions for me, or two observations, I guess. So obviously you brought up the repeat theme of transport, which I think Nick is probably just so sick of hearing at the minute. I think what just concerns me slightly is some of the bits that I just pick up on the patch around what providers talk about in terms of the cold spot. And I think Lucy made the point when you've summed up at the end of the last session when we spoke about this. You know, the point is of this fund, I think, is that it has to be in St Neots and in East Cambs. So what worries me, you know, the inference that people are expecting something to happen to funnel people to FE outside of the patch, which is not in St Neots or East Cambs. So that's just one concern that just sits in the back of my mind. The other point is, you know, the first round was a round of consultations with providers, principally, and there was very little business engagement. We did a bit in St Neots. I'm not sure what happened in East Cambs, just because I'm unfamiliar with it as a St Neots resident. Yeah, I'm too close. That is the bit that slightly concerns me. So the themes that are coming out that you've picked out here, actually, is that reflective of the demand from the labour market right now? Because I don't necessarily recognise those skills as coming up in the conversations that I have with businesses in or around St Neots and broader Huntingdonshire. So we're asking the providers who are going to be bidding on this, what do they want to bid on, which is lovely, but actually how connected is that to the economic growth that we need to unlock using this fund? So how are we planning on engaging those businesses and actually mapping what we're trying to procure against those current vacancies and what we can really do with this fund?
Yeah, I think on the transport point, I think it was as much about actually also getting people into those places as well. One of the big findings from the feasibility study is the sort of the viability from a numbers perspective. Actually, there is a need to, and one of the reasons why there wasn't a huge building kind of the answer, because actually there's not necessarily the numbers. So actually any provision you did create in those places, yes, that would obviously help the immediate residents there, but there is a need for consideration around transport to bring some people into those as well. On the business point, I think it's a very well made point. Yes, we engaged in the original bit in both East Cambs and in St Neots, so that was positive. One of the questions we've been asking providers is around their kind of relationships, not just with other providers, with businesses, and how they would seek to work with businesses engaged. And we've had some good answers. There are clearly some very, very strong relationships with some of the larger businesses for some of the providers, but not all. I think it's a fair challenge, and let us, Andrea and I can pick that up just to think about what we might want to do around that. Because again, the benefit of this kind of initial engagement before we start the procurement is we can pick things up like that. So thank you for raising it.
Eileen.
Thank you. I was just wondering, taking things back a step, is how much work is being done in these cold spot areas by the Careers Hub to actually raise awareness and create the preparedness for people to take advantage of these opportunities? Is there work going on to coordinate some of this work? Because I'm very keen on programs raising aspirations for people where perhaps there is an aspiration at the moment. So really I think that's the work of the Careers Hub, perhaps, to work with these people before they get to the point of taking advantage of these opportunities.
might be a question for Andrea or Alexis rather than for Rob, but I don't know if either of you want to pick it up. It's probably a bit early, but
I'm happy to pick it up, Lucy. I mean, yeah, absolutely. We're part of the same team, so definitely the Careers Hub and our enterprise coordinators will play a role in working with schools to kind of raise awareness of those opportunities. The Careers Hub, interestingly, kind of is specifically for young people. So beyond that, for adults, we also need to work with our existing provider base. We also need to work with DWP, Job Centre Plus, National Careers Service. So there is an absolute host of organisations that we will work with to make sure we raise awareness of the new provision that's going to be put on in these places, to make sure people are aware of them and how to access them. And it will also be the role of the providers who secure the capital funding. You know, they do that work really well as well themselves in terms of engaging and enrolling learners and working with their networks locally and regionally to make sure that they're raising awareness. So that's an area of work that I'm quite confident about in terms of making sure we get the messaging out as soon as we're clear on what it is that needs to be publicised and how we can get the routes to market as such to get those people in and engaged and participating in learning.
Thank you. Really helpful. I've got a couple of points to make, if that's all right. I'm going to go before you, Nick, and then yeah. Well, I don't have. No, it's fine. I will. Sorry. So I think it's there's lots and lots of really interesting questions that you've set us. Some of which are, I think, were around what kind of priorities does the committee have in terms of timing? How important is collaboration as one of your things, and how much do we want to focus on needs versus on kind of anything that people want to suggest. I think that one of the things I think is really useful about this process is the conversations that we're having with providers. Probably all of those three things that I've just mentioned, so the NEAT work, the idea of working kind of collaboratively with other providers, and it being relatively quick. All of those would be desirable. So if somebody brings in a bid that ticks all of those boxes, that's obviously going to be quite a good thing. But I wouldn't want providers to not bring forward things that were not in that category, if that makes sense. And I think it's kind of potentially worth, and probably Nick can tell me if I'm way out of line on this, but what we've got here is not a vast amount of capital funding. But that relatively small amount of capital funding has driven some really quite interesting and creative conversations between us and providers, and also between us and businesses and other places about what we should be doing to improve provision in these two parts of our region. Those conversations have in themselves, I think, been very useful. I think that actually the process that got us to the first stage of saying, actually, we're not just going to build a building, but these are the issues that we're trying to tackle, was very helpful. If the providers then come back with far more fantastic projects than we can even begin to fund through this piece of capital funding, we may be a little bit further down the line in saying, oh, well, okay, we'll use this funding for these ones, these projects, which we can do quite well with the funding that we've got. But actually, maybe we need to come back to the Combined Authority or back to some of our other partners, maybe, who knows, even Skills England, with some thoughts about these are some other types of provision we'd like to try. We might like to pilot some of this stuff in our area. So I think it's worth using some of this to say these are our top priorities, but actually if you've got other ideas, do bring them forward, because this is an area where stuff is happening and growth is happening. Does that make sense, and is that helpful feedback on your questions?
Yes, A, it makes a lot of sense, and B, very helpful feedback. And again, there are different kind of mechanisms you can use in a procurement exercise. So one of the questions you might be asking, well, if you were to get 50% of your funding, could you still deliver it, or what would that do on timeline? So you can actually start to create a bit more flexibility for you as a combined authority to say, well, actually, we like that project, but we're only going to give it 50% of its ask, and we can do some more. And so that there are different ways you can start to do that. I think for the providers, it will just be about being clear and about us getting the wording right to sort of that carrot, if you like, that says, because what you don't want to do is them to think, well, I'm not going to, this is too speculative, I'm not going to kind of waste my time putting a bid in. Linked to that, it's also about not making the sort of the bid process so complex, it's so time. So there's different things we can do, and certainly, yeah, we can give some thought to that. So that is, if that's where we think we want to be, that's absolutely, that works well.
On that point about not making the bidding process too onerous, because it is a huge problem that actually you might have some ideas, but if it's going to take your staff 5 days to set them out, you're going to have to be pretty certain that you're going to get the funding in order to put that much time in. Yeah. So at some level, and I realise it might slow things down a bit, but to have a kind of initial bids which are quite small, and then we come back to the ones that we're really interested in and say you need to draft those up more carefully, might be worth doing, and partly because by doing that relatively easy light touch part to start with, you'll probably get a lot more ideas in than if you make everyone do a full bid at the very beginning.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's certainly something we're currently thinking about, particularly kind of in that you do the early briefing in November, you could then ask for expressions of interest, which would be very short pre-Christmas. And also, I think one of the things that it's also an equity point. Some of the providers have bid teams, others don't. Yes. And so actually, again, you can unintentionally favour certain providers by making it a very complicated bidding process. So again, that is something we are very mindful of.
That's really helpful. Nick, did you have one more question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, whatever you look towards procuring, there's always a kind of other things happen which maybe change the nature of what might be relevant. Governments change, obviously, and priorities change. But I could, for instance, I could talk about the importance that we know that a reservoir needs to be built in Cambridge and Peterborough, without a shadow of a doubt, and that's already been driven by many bodies, including ourselves, about the importance of that. We have in some ways no control over that, but knowing that that's on the horizon and the potential for opportunity skills, being in Fenland, very close to East Cambridgeshire, how would we go about aligning, and indeed, do you have awareness of that? Likewise, I'd hoped that you'd be well aware of some of the ambition that we have, particularly around Peterborough Station Quarter, as a kind of area where we have the benefit of funds to drive the early stages of development, but the ambition that Combined Authority has around the longer term, and just because it's in Peterborough doesn't mean to say that people who live around the East Cambridgeshire and St Neots area wouldn't also be interested. But also, and I had this conversation only last week, and may well have been with some of your potential providers, we have the possibility of a very enormous universal studio within 10 miles of St Neots. Now, that may or may not happen, but that has been on the cards in terms of a huge investment. And let's be clear that if you do have a Universal Studios equivalent to sort of Disneyland Paris, it's not just that they're going to want people to stand behind a hot dog stall. There's a huge amount of kind of infrastructure building, as well as ongoing electrics engineering. And I'm keen to understand, with maybe not, you can't give me a direct answer, but those three particular projects that I think about day and night as important to the long-term economy now, although we have no control over the universal stuff, but those possibilities and how they could be opportunities could arise, and are they on your radar?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, they are in the answer is yes, they are in the broadest sense, as well as other kind of quite big infrastructure projects. And again, I think some of it will come down to drafting around the kind of local priority element and that kind of section. And I think that's where it will be about fully trying to work out where are there things that kind of align, so we can talk about themes as opposed to individual projects, and where might we want to reference specific projects, and some of that will be probably, if we're going to go in January, what can and can't be sort of put into the public domain with a degree of certainty. So I think that, again, that will be that constant check back in with the team here to make sure that we're kind of reflecting the latest possible position. But I think we've got to reflect those big priorities because they're gonna drive so much of where need's going to come from.
I don't see any further questions. I think that's been a really useful discussion. So thank you very much indeed, Rob and the team, all of you. Is there anything else you need from us? I mean, I think this is on the agenda to note. We don't need to vote on it, but is there any other information you need before you go on for your next steps?
No, other than I think we would obviously welcome the opportunity to kind of re-engage at appropriate points to keep everyone informed, and we will certainly be in touch around that kind of check and challenge, if you like, from some of the members of this group of the materials themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. It's quite exciting. Good luck with the next stages. Thank you very much indeed. Good. So we have commented and noted that, and we will move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is skills boot camps. I think Nick is introducing this one. Is that correct? Have I got that right? Yes. And then just on this one, it is quite a moving area. So I think Nick's going to give us, tell me if I get this wrong, but I think Nick's going to give us a fairly high-level introduction. There are some things we will not be able to ask questions about. So if you end up asking a question which Nick is not able to answer in this meeting because we're sort of in the middle of procurement and there's moving stuff all over the place, he will be around afterwards outside the public meeting to answer more questions if that's necessary. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, so the paper set out was to update members on Wave 5, to update members on Wave 6 bid that's been put in. I can't, unfortunately, update on Wave 5 as it stands at the moment. There was a message that was sent out towards the end of last week. The standstill period for contracts to be awarded was due to end last week, but had to be extended due to a question coming in from a provider. And because of that, we are still in the standstill period. So with regards to Wave 5, there's nothing I can share, unfortunately, other than that we're working to conclude that period and get Wave 5 started. With regard to Wave 6, the bid has been submitted as per the paper for £3.5 million of funding to deliver Wave 6 boot camps. As it stands, a decision has not been made on that yet. We're expecting the decision from the Department for Education towards the end of the year. That decision will determine how much funding they award us and when they intend for Wave 6 to commence, whether that be financial year or whether that will change with Skills England and the conversations they're having with the alignment of the boot camp calendar. I was very excited to share a much fuller update with everybody about Wave 5, but unfortunately I'm not in a position to, sorry.
Thank you for the update you have been able to give us, and we're sorry that you can't as well. Presumably you will be able to send out a kind of briefing note when that does finally come to the point where you're allowed to tell us about it. Can you, sorry?
There'd been an appendices prepared for the conclusion of standstill on Thursday. That is prepared. That may since change before it gets released. But yeah, as soon as we can announce it, we will, because time is of the essence of this.
Is there anything anybody wants to ask which falls within the category of things you are allowed to ask? I don't see any questions, so thank you very much indeed, Nick. And again, if anyone wants to see Nick afterwards, I'm sure that will be fine. Oh, we do actually have votes on this one, so thank you very much, Rena. most of the recommendations are to note, but recommendations C and D are about the advice to the board on the grant funding when it is announced and arrives. Is everyone happy to support all of the recommendations? Does anyone, if you're happy to take them just with acquiescence, we will take those as voted on. I don't see any against, so yes, sorry, you do need a proposer and a seconder. So I'm happy to propose all of the recommendations. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Eileen. And let's just vote on it. All those in favour? Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Lovely. Then item 10 is the future brokerage and skills support for business, which is Alexis.
Chair. So our Region Skills Brokerage Service, known as GrowthWorks with Skills, was formerly part of an established and wider commissioned business growth service, which was formed in 2021 and known as GrowthWorks. That was the specific skills work stream within that service was funded by European social funds. Brexit brought with it the closure of those European structural funding opportunities. However, with support from members, the brokerage service was able to continue in-house at the CPCA to deliver support to local businesses under an allocation of UK Shared Prosperity Funds for the 24-25 financial year. The allocation for which ends on the 31st of March 2025. So with less than 6 months remaining under the current funding model and with ongoing uncertainty over the availability of the external funds, this paper has been produced to provide assurances to members that of the CPCA's ongoing commitment to preserving a local place-based brokerage service on patch as part of a core business support offer that the Combined Authority provides to local businesses. It is our intention to utilise gain share funding that was approved by the Combined Authority Board as part of its medium-term financial plan, also known as our NTFP, back in December 2023, and that will enable us to fund this continuation of the service. We have talked a little bit about the service and what it does already this morning. It is something that it is a service that has been identified within our local skills improvement plan as a critical vehicle to enabling businesses to grow their workforce. It's also something that is outlined within the Combined Authority's employment and skills strategy as a key enabler and vehicle as well. But what that actually means is it allows us to deliver some of the services that we've talked about this morning. It gives us a mechanism to mobilise more innovative activities like our internship programme. It allows us to increase our connections between the business community and the education community as well, and drive on some of the careers ambitions too. And that's just a few examples that are pertinent to the discussion we've already had about what it seeks to achieve. So this paper has been produced to provide a narrative and an outline of some of the benefits that we perceive from establishing a service autonomy through direct funding. So moving away from external funding that requires us to deliver on national priorities, enabling a service that allows us to deliver on localised priorities that is more adaptive to economic and policy changes that are relevant to this area. As well as providing greater ability to underpin and support local skills strategies. The paper also provides some detail in regards to current and early thinking around the service's continued evolution. I hope that our approach to delivering internships gives you a flavour of us as a service. We seek to be more dynamic and innovative in how we work with the business community. So there are some specifics within the paper around potentially rebranding the service, which also came up as a thought earlier today, and also about ways that we might work to flex and align to sectoral approaches that are currently being established within the Combined Authority's other business support functions as a good practice way of working, and it gives a bit more of an alignment to some of the emerging and kind of key skills-led initiatives that are likely to launch in coming months, like the Good Work Charter, like our work and health strategies. This allows us to continue that mechanism to deliver on broader intentions. So this paper provides that brief outline, and I do appreciate that it's brief. But it is our intention to return to committee in the new year with a further and developed service outline and strategy. So as an interim update, this is to provide you with assurances that it is our intention to continue to deliver on this work and to grow it. And it is also an opportunity for me to invite members to feed into the service design and development. So on that, I'm very happy to take any questions. I'm very happy to take any feedback and thoughts. Thank you very much.
Alexis, that's great. Any questions? Charlotte.
Thank you, Alexis. Really interesting to see the developments. I think language and brand is a really important piece. Some of it, to me, has historically felt a little bit like internal language has kind of crept out, and you get a Frankenstein's model that means something to us all. But if you were sort of Joe or Jenny Bloggs on the street and you walked into it, would it mean something? So that's positive to hear. I wonder, will there be any sort of mechanism? I almost describe it as UCAS for apprenticeships. I appreciate UCAS are evolving to cater around apprenticeships better, but historically I've always seen some of our larger organisations really good at attracting applicants, but sadly can only take on, say, 5%, and you've got 95% who could be very good people with great ambition, but they perhaps don't have the awareness of the kind of 95% SME micro business profile that dominates our region.
Okay, I completely agree with that statement, Charlotte. I think there is an ongoing need to educate people around the broader opportunities that exist around apprenticeships. Our skills brokerage service is one of our main areas of promoting apprenticeship messages into the business community has been a previous focus. I will grant that. I think moving away from funding that that directs our energies towards solely business engagement and actually allowing us to create a brokerage service that delivers for residents and the wider community will enable us more opportunities to be able to do that direct to resident language. Some of the work that we've been undertaking this year has been trying to pilot some of those approaches, and some of that has been seen with our work with Waitrose and the John Lewis Group, where it was very much started through a desire for them for us to engage them as a levy sharing partner that would allow more SMEs to benefit from apprenticeships. It morphed into actually something that was around engaging wider communities and communities that have experienced deprivation or difficulties or barriers to the labour market. So it very much evolved in its purpose, and I think was a really, really good model that we can build upon for the future. But absolutely, I think the brokerage needs to look at its remit as potentially expanding beyond just a business-to-business conversation, and it needs to look about how it brings residents into that talent pipeline.
Hi, Alex. I just want to point out, you've already alluded to it, but I cannot say it enough from my personal point of view. I'll let others around the table say it, but in a further step towards cohesion, the service will rebrand itself to increase recognition of the service's position as part of the Combined Authorities Business Growth Support Function. That has to be, in my humble opinion, fully funded and absolutely kind of with fireworks and highlighting, because, yeah, quiet ones, yes, because I take that. Simply because I've lost count of the number of times I have been in conversations at business meetings where I've talked about the importance of getting engaged with a combined authority. Then 5 minutes down the line, I realise, oh no, we've had GrowthWorks. You know, now in the past, GrowthWorks was a separate entity, but GrowthWorks was employed by the combined authority. You know, one of the things I said, you know, a role for a mayor is to highlight what its organisation does. It's not what the mayor does, it's what the combined authority does with its partners, constituent members and the staff. And we have not failed as such, but it's just, we haven't, you know, capitalised in terms of the good news stories, the messaging about that. And again, it's about owning the problems when they happen at the same time. But we have to ensure, and I want you to tell me if you don't think it's, because I've spoken to members of your staff, frustration, No, just that they feel that they want to be stronger branding, you know, about we work for the Combined Authority. And I even myself, you know, the legacy of, you know, the GrowthWorks messaging, we've moved on. It's time to make it very clear that the Combined Authority is here, we're not going anywhere, and we're delivering real change in people's lives, and we should be championing that. And I'm glad to see it's rebranding, but I want to see you as your mayor and being fully resourced and making sure that as that comes out next year, you and your team feel really supported by myself and hopefully the board around it, that in the job that you do.
Just to come back to you on that, there was a logic and a rationale when the service initially came back in-house last year. It was on a 12 months fixed term funding. We had a minimal marketing budget, and we wanted to see how we could use that in a more creative way. As I think it's probably fair to say, as the service lead, we have used this year as a little bit of a test and learn of trying to build upon the legacy that we inherited and where it was effective and where we felt that there could be different ways of working. The evaluation of the former service said that there was probably a brand neutrality to the name. A whole-scale remarket, relaunch, rebrand would have detracted some of our energy and quite a lot of our budget. We felt that we wanted to spend this year on refining the service. It was always the intention that the service needed to have a better recognition and something that spoke and meant something. Because I will agree, what does GrowthWorks with Skills mean now that the GrowthWorks service is no longer? So it's always been on the agenda, it's always been part of the plan. I'm really, really pleased that you welcome it, and I will be capitalising on that opportunity to ask you to support it when it comes around in the new year. Thank you for highlighting that and providing your support to it.
Can I just come back, Chair? I absolutely understand why you made that decision. You know, the last thing we want, having worked in another organisation which is constantly being rebranded and reshaped, is sometimes there's a narrative in terms of working with what you've got, getting sure that your product's ready to deliver and the service is fair, and then going forward. I believe you are in bucket loads, and I want to support you, but I just want to support knowing that you have the support of the Mayor, the Board, and indeed the Combined Authority is front and centre in delivering the good work that you do. So that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I very much agree with both Nick and yourself, Alexis, because I think the criticism Nick rightly makes around the extent to which we've not capitalised on being kind of more than the sum of our parts of the Combined Authority over a range, over a number of years, is I think widely recognised, and enormous amounts of work have been done, not least by colleagues around the table and elsewhere in this building to address that over the last couple of years. And I think absolutely likewise with professional experience of organisational change and 2P and so on, I think it absolutely makes sense that over the last 12 months you're proceeding the way you've described. But now that we are bedded in and this is a permanent fixture, I think it's that broader opportunity to be better integrated with the wider Combined Authority, which just didn't make as much sense when it was separately outsourced. So I think we're all very much on the same page, and this is a really welcome development to see us move forward with that now. So thank you to you and the team.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much, Alexis. We will look forward to seeing all the new stuff that's going to come. It's going to be that one is. Oh no, we do need to vote on this because we need to endorse the proposals, and I think it's important that we do. And I think you've got very strong endorsement. Do you want to propose these ones, Nick? Good. Okay. And I'm happy to second. So, and all those in favour of endorsing the proposals, if you could indicate now. And then that can go back to the board with lots of support. Excellent, thank you, Alexis. We now move on to the Adult Skills Fund current and future commissioning, which is Andrea.
Thank you, Lucy. So this paper is brought to the committee under a series of recommendations, which is to ask them to note the current approach for commissioning for adult skills provision and the future approach beyond 2025, to also approve some transitionary commissioning arrangements and to recommend to the board that you agree to the development of a new adult skills commissioning strategy to be launched next year. So just to put this into context, this is about the commissioning for what used to be called the Adult Education Budget, AEB, is now called ASF, Adult Skills Funding. That's a national policy change through the Department for Education. This is our biggest amount of funding, up to the region of around £12 million from gain share funding. This was the devolved budget for adult skills to the combined authority. What we've got in place at the moment is a commissioning strategy that was last sort of written 2020 and has had various different updates since. And over the years, various iterations of separate papers have come to committee to agree on the approach for commissioning moving forward. Coming into the authority from the sector has been very insightful for me, because I've had the opportunity to have a look at the commissioning arrangements that are in place and to really start to identify areas for improvement in terms of where we could better align our commissioning approach to sectors and to employers and to policy. And I believe that the commissioning strategy is in need of a complete rewrite and refresh, and to publish that so that it's very clear in terms of our intentions for how we will commission skills provision going forward. That's against a backdrop of considerable drivers for change, which are set out in the paper under section 3.8, 9, 10 and 11. So just to highlight those points to you, as mentioned in my director's highlight report, there are significant changes happening at a national level to skills and employment policy. And as part of deeper devolution, we are expecting the government to consolidate funding for the Adult Skills Fund with funding for skills boot camps and funding for free courses for jobs, which would be very well received, because at the moment we get stuck in annual cycles of commissioning for boot camps and free courses for jobs, because they're given to the combined authority on a grant basis on an annual cycle. So to have that consolidated into our funding would be fantastic. And other things to note are some changes around the Public Procurement Act, which we want to take into consideration and make sure that we've got the right structures in place for procurement and commissioning for the future. So in order to set out our future commissioning arrangements, we do have to take into consideration where our contracts for services lay at the moment. Across our adult education budget, we have two mechanisms for commissioning skills. One is through grant funding agreements, predominantly with FE colleges and local authorities, and the other is through procurement for services, contract services with independent training providers and with the third sector. In the broadest terms, that will continue, but what we want to do is take the opportunity to really look at how we make a lot of that happen and how we get those contracts in place. And more importantly, we want to really look at what we want to commission and how we want that to be delivered across the region. So we've set out a plan to rewrite the commissioning strategy and to put in place some interim arrangements that will manage the contract situation as it stands, because all current contracts are due to come to an end at the end of July of next year. So we are proposing that we move forward immediately with setting up a dynamic purchasing system for independent training providers in the third sector, so that we can use that to procure services with immediate effect and to make that process as headache-free as possible, having a really sort of smart and sensible approach to how we use that and to what we commission. And then for us to look at how we make our grant agreement arrangements robust with our colleges and local authorities to make sure that the right provision continues to be delivered across the region. So the intention is to bring back in January to committee the final draft of the commissioning strategy, which will set out some ambition, but also about the how and how we will do that and the mechanisms for that, which will very much focus on partnerships with our provider base and with employers, for the committee to then approve to go to Combined Authority Board later in January. So there is a vote on this paper, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to start with a question this time, since I can't see lots of other people desperate to go. Moving to a dynamic purchasing as quickly as possible seems very sensible in a range of ways. Do the providers also recognise that that's a sensible way forward? I can see that it might mean some extra effort for them, but I'm just curious to know what feedback you've had so far.
So far, the feedback has been really positive. I think they want a very clear and transparent mechanism for which they can engage. And nationally, there is soon to be a launch of a kind of national dynamic purchasing system for adult skills providers, which we hope to kind of work with to make everything as smooth and seamless as possible for the providers. Because I think in the past, things have been not so smooth, a bit clunky to engage, and I think we recognise that, and I'm really keen to continue taking feedback from providers to shape things going forward, because it's key that we do our best to make that process as straightforward as possible and not make it awkward or difficult.
That's really helpful. Alice.
Thank you. Is that on? Yeah, I think this work is clearly really important, and I'm really excited to hear about the new commissioning strategy that's coming forwards. I think as local authorities, I'm sure, would be very interested in being involved in this, particularly through work that our teams do, particularly around economic development, and with the kind of broader view that Cambridge is growing and how we're going to develop kind of skills and economy together. So I think that for us, that's something that is particularly something we would like to see, and we'd be very keen to support. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Oh, I've got one from Nick, and then I will.
Sorry. Just a final quick reassurance for me. I absolutely support everything in it, but I want to draw attention to the last thing of 3.112, which is around the single assurance framework. Obviously, that is a new process that has been brought into our organisation for very good reasons. And as we are getting used to that overarching good governance and behaviours, I'm keen to understand that. Is there any suggestion that the single assurance framework, in doing its job, could possibly make it more difficult for you to do your job?
I think the proof is going to be in the pudding. I think we need to kind of work our way through this process and really establish whether it could. I think I'm cautious about it. I think it could if we're not sensible with the approach that we take to it. So I'm really keen to make sure that we work with colleagues who are overseeing the single assurance framework to really test this and see if this is something that's going to cause a blockage in the process, or actually whether it's going to add value and make sure that things are much more kind of secure in that sense. I think there's a recognition that the process is very much needed, but hopefully it will be one that will enable things rather than cause any blockages. But I'm happy to report back on that as we go through the system.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions on this, so we will move to the recommendations. I do just want to say that I'm also very pleased to see that we are going to be completely coming forward with a new strategy. I think it's really important, and that's a very welcome piece of work. So the recommendation A is to note, but recommendations B and C are to recommend to the board to approve the transitionary commissioning plan, and to recommend the development of the new commissioning strategy. I'm happy to propose. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Nick. All those in favour, if you could indicate. Again, I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. That's excellent. We will move on to item 12, which is the Employment and Skills Board update, which is Charlotte.
Well, I think one of the big positives is we've heard a lot of the content here today that we benefited from at Employment and Skills Board. So I won't dwell into the detail of items that we've covered, but I will just cite them. So we did benefit from all being reintroduced to Andrea, which was probably unnecessary because she's done a very great job of being very prolific across the region, engaging with various stakeholders. But it did mean that the board were able to hear firsthand Andrea's very helpful insight as to what Skills England would bring and could look like. We also spent a lot of time hearing a really helpful regional economic update from Cambridgeshire County Council. What some of the kind of hallmarks, it was probably a 30-40 minute presentation, so I won't go into all of the detail now, but some of the hallmarks across the region currently is that we're seeing economic activity across our region slightly lower than the rest of the UK. We have seen an increase in unemployment, which is higher than the UK average, and we've also witnessed a decline in vacancies in the labour market. We do have some challenging areas. So Peterborough, we still have 44% of total claimants across the region, which is probably by proportion slightly higher than what it should be. And that has seen an annual increase of over 10%. And also challenges remaining in places like Fenland, where unemployment was still becoming a concern. Now, it was really helpful to have this presentation because that then dovetailed into the annual report for the Local Skills Improvement Plan, which was published this August, covering off the 4 growth sectors that we all know across the region, being currently advanced manufacturing, life sciences, digital and IT and agri-tech, but also those cross-cutting themes of digital skills and green skills, and then our cross-sector priorities where we pick up really important items like collaboration. So hence it was really great to hear Alexis's report this morning, and also things like transferable skills, where we're seeing skills such as communication cited 4.5 times higher than the highest technical skill being requested by employers. So really interesting trends. We also, though, looked at some of the trends being published in the quarterly labour market analysis. Some of those would be that we've got a shortage of those in teaching occupations and people leaving the sector, which will create further pressures that we're already witnessing, that we do have demand around care. That we are seeing certain trends in those growth sectors, some of which are growing their jobs, and some we're seeing some different trends coming through, and also those needs for employers to invest in training in certain digital technologies and areas such as artificial intelligence. We also reflected, though, on the very positive collaborative work across the region with specialist networks and stakeholders all coming together to try and respond to some of these trends, holding hands and making sure that it wasn't isolated activity. But really what we tried to do was to discuss some of the key metrics from the regional economic update. Where were the KPIs that we might be able to identify and measure to our Mayor's point, to make big impacts, and to see not just what is deemed best value for money, but actually what really has the impact and the desire so that we can see our region and our people to be able to grow. We then moved on to the work and health strategy, which looks to improve health and employment outcomes. Again, very important, as the 2 previous reports both pointed to that cohort of individuals who are sadly suffering with ill health and able not to return to the workforce. Some of the key actions from that agenda item were that Andrea and the team would look to form a working group, but also with an eye on what this means for the Good Work Charter and universal support. And I think from Andrea's last presentation, it's really obvious the team are looking at all of the initiatives and policy coming through at the moment and thinking about how they create a plan that really joins up and is succinct. And it also raised the points that the membership of the board should consider a health representative, which since the start of this year we have identified we do need to look at the membership of the board, but the presentations that we had at Employment and Skills Board, we want to make sure that we're bringing about the right individuals to be able to tackle what we deem are those issues that need to be hit first, but also the opportunity to form some spin-out project groups as opposed to expecting all work to be done in one central place that could be slower. Finally, we did talk about, or we received a presentation regarding the changes to commissioning, and Andrea's very helpfully just covered that off expertly. So I will stop there, Councillor Nessinger, but very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for a very thorough update from the board. From the Employment and Skills Board, it's really helpful to have you here able to do that, so that's great. Questions for Charlotte? So thorough that no one has any questions. But it's really good to hear that. And interesting thought about health representation. I'm not quite sure what there are so many different bits of the health landscape. It's a little bit difficult to know who the right person would be, but I can totally see that that would be helpful. Thank you. Good, that one was to note, so I think we note. Thank you very much. And we'll move to Bruna for the budget and performance report. Thank you, Bruna.
Hello all, nice to see you all. So I'm your finance manager, I'm here to speak about numbers. What a news. So the report you have in front of you is the report to the end of June. So we move to report quarterly. So we'll be always to the end of the quarter that we terminate. So we are a bit behind, but because we only do the next one, we'll report to September. That's the way in which we're looking forward to move. So on the income side, to the end of June, we received 13.3 million, which is 84% of the total income for the year. That is 15.8. The leftovers are 2.5, of which 1.4 will be for multiply. That's coming every quarter, so it will come regularly. And the other part of it is bootcamp that we will receive when we submit the deferral of the information or the work that is being completed. In relation to forecast for income, there is very little variance. There is a reduction on AB free costs for job because this is due to an underspend from previous year of 239. And an increase in AB budget of 207. So overall, the effect of it is only £29,000. In relation to cost, the cost, they are higher than budget of £200,000. This is due to a variance in the way in which was reported the UK SPF skill cost mostly, but this is going to be sorted. It's just a matter of where we accounted for lines within the organization itself, not that Alexis didn't have the money or anything, all good. Other variances to note, of course, there is some, this is the biggest variances anyway that we need to mention. In relation to forecast, we are in line with everything, but of course the UK SPF, that is the one we were changing in the first place. So that's all. Hopefully very like that.
Thank you very much, Bruna. Are there any questions for Bruna on the budget? Sam.
Well, thanks. I mean, just to say, obviously, given challenges with some of the projects referenced here, we've had long-standing discussions around how we can help make sure that we are getting best value from the money we're spending and making fullest use of the money we've got available. You've referenced mitigating steps that were taken around juggling around of money between years, to technical budget term there. I think in that context, it is remarkable how little the budget and actual variance is, albeit I think that's partly coincidental in terms of amounts offsetting, but no, this is actually welcome, particularly given where we've been in years not very long ago. So thank you, and it is very clearly presented, which is most welcome in budget papers, of course, as well.
Thank you very much. Much appreciate to hear something positive.
I would echo that. I think that it's very nice to have a budget which is looking pretty much as it should be, which has not always been the case, so it's great. Good. I don't see any further questions on it, and again, that's for noting. So thank you very much, Bruno. And then the final item on our agenda is our own committee agenda plan. Does anyone want to make any comments on the agenda plan? Don't see any comments, at which point we will draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all very, very much for your time and your contributions. It's been a very useful and interesting morning. Thank you very much.